It's good to be here. I like what I feel when I'm together with God's wonderful people. I like what I feel here at Calvary Assembly. This is a delight and a joy to be with you today. And let me introduce my bride, 53 years plus. Barb, would you stand? We're still working at trying to get it right. That's why we're not giving up yet. We're going to hang in there. We got years to go. Now, Pastor Ed said I could take my liberty. He said, Jack, you preach as long as you want, an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever. He did tell me most of you leave about noon. I found out a long time ago it works better if I finish up about the same time you do. So if you think you're done listening, let me know, because I want to wrap it up and finish about the same time with you. But in the time we have, Pastor Ed told me that he is doing a series on going back to the basics. I like that. It's good to get back to bedrock, foundations and footings, and the basics of our relationship with God and with each other. And so I want to share with you a story from the pages of Holy Script that is about as basic as you're going to get. I call it the patterns of Providence. It's found in the parallel of the Gospels. You'll read it there in Matthew 14 and Mark 6, Luke 10. And I'm going to read it for you and set it in place from John, the Gospel of John, the 6th chapter. It's called the feeding of the 5,000. The bread and fish story. The little boy and his lunch. Any number of identities we could give it. And I'm going to share it with you this morning, and I trust that we'll get back to the basics, each of us. I'm looking for that kind of renewal in my own spirit of living this out. From John, the 6th chapter. And I'm going to read from the 5th verse down through the 13th. You look it up in your iPhone or in your iPad, or if you're like I am, you like the rustle of paper and still a little bit of the old school. I like to hold it in my hand. But John 6, I start with the 5th verse. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming towards him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? Then Jesus said, make the people to sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in numbers of about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. And so when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing be lost. Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which they were left over by those who had eaten. The story of the miracle of the bread and the fish. Now, I don't know where you get into the story. I don't know how you are when you read, but I read with all of the emotions and the imagination that I can muster up for that moment. I mean, when I read this book, I can hear the waves of the seashore bouncing and banging up against the rocks. I can feel the wind blow. I can hear and sense and feel. In fact, sometimes I scratch and sniff, see if there's something else in there that I missed. I read the book with understanding and with identity. So I ask you to get into the story with me this morning. Now, I don't know where you identify in this story. There's many places for us to get involved. Some of you here this morning, you might identify with the multitude, the hungry crowd, those who represent a need. They came at a moment in their life, they found it in a desperate hunger as they sat there all through the day and now into the late afternoon. Some of you might identify with the disciples. They're very much a part of this story. Philip especially, right up front. He must have been the treasurer, I don't know. At least he was the bookkeeper. He figured out right away how much it would cost. And we always have those in church who are very concerned about that, and that's valued. I understand that. But first thing, you know what that's going to cost us if we do that? That was Philip. He was there trying to guard the treasury and make sure that things were done right. You might identify with the whole of the disciples. They did what most leaders do in a church. They evaluated the situation. They took an in-depth look at all of that which was their assets. And then they wrote a resolution, had a business meeting. Whereas there's a great multitude, and whereas it is late in the day, and whereas the people are very hungry, and whereas all we have is 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, be it therefore resolved that we send the crowd away. That was their answer. Let's just go ahead and shut it down and say we're done. It's bigger than we are. We don't have an answer that will meet the need. Some of you, hopefully there will be a lot of you here this morning that would identify with Andrew. He's in the story, Simon Peter's brother. Andrew was out with the crowd. Andrew, he had evidently been out working out around the outer edges and making sure everybody was being taken care of. And somewhere in the crowd, he found a little fella, a little boy. And Andrew was the bringer. Andrew was the one who brought the little lad and said, here's a little boy, he's got some bread and fish. And he brought him to the master. Thank God we have Andrews in church. Those who are bringers, those who find the resources in others that the master said, I can use that. And then there's the little boy himself. Now, he's the guy who comes across as the hero. I find great delight in the little lad, the kid, the one with the bread and the fish. He really is the one who I want to identify with this morning. You say, well, how can you identify with a little kid, maybe 8 years, 9 years old? We don't know, just a lad. What can I identify and find myself in the story with him? You can look at me and know that there are diminishing returns. I kissed 70 and kept moving pretty fast past it. So how do I go back and identify with a little child? What is that about? Well, you look at the story and you analyze it just a little bit. We're talking about getting back to the basics. So let's look at what was it he had? He had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That was it. 5 barley loaves, 2 fish. Barley loaves would probably be small, kind of like we think even in terms of our pita bread, the small little disc of maybe 5-inch across. Fish maybe the size of sardines, or as we up in Minnesota used to go out and do smelt fishing. Any of you from the north who've been out there in the cold waters, tried to get smelt in, just a little fish about 5, 6, maybe 7, 8 inches long at most. That's all he had. But when I look at it and I think of what he had, it comes down to pretty much this: 5s and 2s. Life is pretty much made up of 5s and 2s. All of us could identify with a little lad and what he had on just identifying it as 5s and 2s. My life is made up of 5s and 2s. I got 2 arms, 2 legs. I got 5 fingers on each hand, 5 toes in each foot. I got 5 senses. I can see, I can smell, I can taste, I can hear, I can touch. Life is pretty much just a lot of 5s and 2s when you think of it. So I want to talk to you about how you use your 5s and 2s. The pattern of providence. The Lord says, if you'll give me what you have, if you'll give me your 5s and 2s, I can make something that'll meet the need with just what you have. Now, let's just, for a moment, before we get into the story here, and find out our application identity with it. The little fella had a lot of options that he could have gone with. Now, I believe this book. I believe everything in this book. It says genuine leather. I even believe that. I believe the maps at the back. I'm simple in my faith. I believe everything in this book. But I confess to you, in this story, it presses me to the limit to believe everything. I'm going to believe it, but it pushes the limits with me. We've just had one boy grow up in our home, our son. He's now 45 years old. But as a little fella, it always amazed me. I'd watch him. I mean, the guy could just, it was there and it was gone on the plate. He'd come home from school, raid the kitchen and the refrigerator, and it didn't seem to do anything about his appetite come the dinner hour a couple hours later. And what I find it hard to believe, having at least raised one little fella and knowing the pattern, that this little guy at about 3 or 4 in the afternoon would still have his lunch. That's kind of hard to believe, if you ask me. I mean, that little guy hadn't said, it's mine. I can do what I want to with it. I'm hungry. Mama packed it for me. I'm going to eat it right now. He could have eaten that lunch about 10 o'clock in the morning. This was a whole day's involvement out there in the teachings of Jesus. I mean, this wasn't just a moment of being in an intersection together. They were out there for the day. And the little fella could have, about 10 o'clock, said, I'm hungry, found a place, and devoured his lunch. I met a lot of people like that. They come to a place later when the master could really use what they have, and somewhere along the way, they just said, I was hungry and I ate it. It was mine. I indulged myself. There's a lot of people, when it comes to the 5s and 2s of their life, they have selfishly, and yet with some sense of joy, indulged themselves of that which was their 5s and 2s. The little fella could have done that. Or the little fella, he could have taken a little break from all of that which was going on in the lecture series with Jesus. He could have wandered his way over, and there he saw the river, set his lunch down, and grabbed a stone to sink. Skipped it 4 times out across the water. Try it again. Another one. I mean, he could have just enjoyed himself skipping the stones and having a good time out there. And then he stirred up a squirrel, and so he took off after the squirrel, chasing the squirrel, and up and around the trees and down through the valley and up the other side, and squirrel got away. Little fellow goes back to get his lunch. Couldn't remember where he put it down. Lost his lunch. Just doing other things here and there and about, but he'd lost his lunch. He had nothing. Andrew would come and find him there, and he wouldn't have anything to bring with him. Or he could have kept his lunch, and Andrew would have found him with it, and Andrew could have taken him to Jesus. This is the moment we're waiting for. The little guy with his 5s and 2s and Jesus together. And what's going to happen now? If we believe it is going to be a miracle, that'll be enough for everybody. But the little boy, he still had options. He could have said, now, Jesus, I'll give you my lunch, my 5s and 2s. But I want it to be just between us, you and me. Just the 2 of us. Let's get away from everybody else and let's sit down, and I'll be delighted to share it with you, Jesus, but I don't want anybody else to get in on this. We used to sing a song. I can't believe some of the songs that we used to sing. Just Jesus and me. Like it was going to be the two of us and no one else. And we could kind of close the door and pull the shades and just be quiet with Jesus all alone and not care about anybody else in the neighborhood. And the little fella could have done that. He could have said, Jesus, I'll share it, but only the two of us. Or he could have brought it to Jesus, and he could have shared it and given it to Jesus and said, no, I'm going to give it to you, and you can do what you please to do with it. But there's a couple things, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to tell you what I kind of feel about, because I'm giving it to you. I hope you'll respond to this. But there was a lady out there that cut me off in that crowd. She pushed me aside. She was angry with me and told me to get out of her way. And I'd just soon she not have any of this lunch. I don't think that's asking too much. After all, she was mean to me. I think everybody else should get it but her. Or he could have given it to the Lord. I've met people like that. And even like this. They say, I'll give it to you, Lord, but I'd kind of like to tell you who ought to be serving it. You got a couple disciples, whether you knew it or not, are not real nice. You got some guys working for you that I just didn't like. I've kind of been sizing it up here, Lord. So I'll give it to you, but I just assume when they get ready to serve this big crowd, they would not be the ones who serve it. The little fella had a lot of options. And some of us are guilty. I know there have been times in my life, in any one of those type of moments, that I've maybe crossed over the line or gotten on the wrong side of the issue. I like what the little boy did. It says he brought it to Jesus. He gave his lunch, and then he got out of the way. He stepped back. He didn't know what Jesus would do. Maybe Jesus would say, oh, God, I'm so famished. Teaching like this all day long just wears me down. And in this human frame of the body I live in, it gets hungry, and I'm so glad you brought me something to eat. And he could have turned his back and gone ahead, and that wouldn't be like the Jesus I know, but the little fella didn't know. Jesus could have taken it and shared it just with his disciples and said, they've worked hard all day, and I think I should give them first. None of that is what happened. As we read the story, you heard it. He blessed it. It says in one of the other Gospels that he blessed it and he brake it. Here in John, it just says that he received it and he broke it and he gave it. And he multiplied it in the process. More than enough. And we'll get to that as we wrap it up here. But I want to talk to you and myself a little bit about what we have as fives and twos. What is it that you possess? What can you bring to Jesus and give him? We trust him to do what is right with whatever we give him. That's not the question here. But what do you have to give him? I have to take inventory in my life on a regular basis. I have things to give him today I didn't have 50 plus years ago when I started the ministry. There are new things coming to me. People bring me into new awarenesses and new experiences that are mine that I can bring to the Lord and give him things this week that I didn't even have last week. Over the years, I've been so privileged to observe and watch. Our ministry has been mostly an itinerant ministry. We've been on the road pretty much our whole married life, one way or the other. Our kids grew up in youth camps and family camps and in retreats and conventions across this nation. That was our life. A couple times I've sat down and had a moment. I just finished a 5-year stint as president at one of our church colleges out in the western Midwest part of our country. And before that, another time I served for 10 years on another college. But even there I traveled. I was always on the road, it seemed. It's kind of where we lived. And doing that, God has privileged us. He's helped us meet so many creative people with their fives and twos. Barb, I think about the lady out in Pueblo, Colorado. And it was a time in their church that they were going to, in fact, it was a missions and church building all at the same time. They were going to be concerned about the uttermost parts of the earth, but also they were going to take care of their Jerusalem, their home base. And so I had been asked to come alongside. A lot of my work has been in strategic initiative planning, helping churches with stewardship challenges. And I was there under that assignment with them. And this lady wanted to participate. She was so excited. As the pastor announced it, they were getting ready for that moment and anticipating it. And she went home to tell her husband, who was a non-believer. And he put her on notice. He says, "You're not giving any of my money to that church. You understand?" And he thought it was all his. I mean, she got a stipend amount for grocery shopping and had to come back and reconcile the receipt with that which was left over. And he took what was left over and then expected her to cook the food for him besides. I mean, he was very narrow, and all of it was his. And she was praying and she was believing and she wanted to give something. She wanted to participate. And so finally one day she went to her husband and thinking this through, and she said, "I take care of your hunting dog. Could I have her pups to sell and give that money to the church?" He laughed and scored at her. He said, "Sure, you can do anything you want to. That dog's only birthed one pup a year. In the last 3 years, they've all died. Yeah, whatever that dog births, you can have." He spun on his heel and walked away. In those days, we used to have unspoken prayer requests. Some of you remember those days back in smaller churches. And they'd take prayer requests, and we didn't want to say it out loud, and you'd raise your hand. "I got an unspoken prayer request. I don't want to tell anybody what it is, but I got a prayer request." Then they'd pray. Her unspoken prayer request, no one knew about. But it wasn't that much longer, and that dog had 4 pups. And I don't know if you've ever prayed what she was praying, but that dog had 4 pups. She sold them for $250 a piece and brought a check in right up front before anybody else had given. She walked in with a check for $1,000. She wanted to participate. But the story isn't over. I know that's what I did. I said, "Oh, wonderful." I was back to preach in that church on their dedication, since I'd been privileged to be there before. And now it was a couple years later, and they were going to dedicate the new building. And sitting on the platform with the pastor, I said, "Is the lady in that story of the dog, is she here?" "Oh," he said, "that's her sitting by her husband out there." I said, "Her husband?" "Oh, yeah, he's a believer now." And I went to him after church, and I said, "Hey, tell me the story about the dog and the pups and the check for $1,000. "Oh," he said, "that dog's retired. But her pups are working for missions." They had a kennel, and they were raising dogs and selling them and giving all the money to missions. Not only that, but the family, the husband, the children, everybody was in church, all because of some 5s and 2s and taking care of a hunting dog. God can use what you have. He can make something of it. I think of the young man in the Minneapolis area, young contractor just getting started. 5 years into his marriage, his wife walked out, slammed the door, and was gone. Left him. His heart was broken. He didn't get married to have it end this way, but it did. And the church that he was a part of had gotten as far as they had built the shell of their building on new property, but had not had the money or the manpower to finish the inside. And so it stood there empty. And he realized that there was really nothing to go home to. And so when he'd finish his 8 to 10, 12-hour days sometimes, he'd get in his pickup and drive out to that empty building. And he'd turn on the lights and he'd start to work. And he'd work late into the night, sometimes midnight or later. People knew his truck. And it wasn't long till they would head home and change their clothes. After spending the day in the office, they'd grab something to even take with them, and they'd show up at the church with that young man. And what was just a solo involvement all of a sudden became 3 or 4 or 5 at a time working on the building. And over a period of almost a year, they had built out the whole interior of that building, finished it. But more than that, than a finished building, was because one guy said, I'll use my 5s and 2s. I'll do what I can. I've got some skill. I've got some time. Not by design, because it just happened that way on the time. And so he'd work almost every night of the week on that building, and all the others would come in. The church came alive. People got excited. The giving took place. They started to give more. And the building is a beautiful, when we go to Minneapolis, that's the church we love to go and sit in, because I know the story. 5s and 2s. I think about, Barb, the time that you and I flew into Nashville. We were going to go out with Randall, and we were going to have dinner together. He and Darlene. Great church in Nashville. And we went to the church property. We landed, got the rental car, jumped in it, and took off right away. As we pulled into the parking lot, we went into the building. They were waiting for us in the foyer because we'd called and told them we were on our way. And at our age, sometimes there are priorities, especially a long trip on the plane. No break in between. My first question was, where is your bathroom, please? Right away, where's your bathroom? And Barb thanked me for asking, and the two of us went 2 different directions, down 2 different halls. And when we came out, almost at the same time, spontaneously, we both, with some bewilderment, we said, who's in charge of your bathrooms? And they started to laugh. They said, we knew you'd be impressed. I'd never been in a bathroom like that, not in a church for sure. I mean, fresh cut flowers, linen towels. It was immaculately clean, every detail of it. And Barb said, you should have seen the bathroom I was in. She started telling me about her experience. And the pastor and his wife smiled and said, we have a retired couple in the church that came to us and said that they couldn't teach a Sunday school class. We can't be in the children's ministry. We wouldn't know what to do. We're not good on the platform in music. We just really don't know what we could do, but we've noticed the bathrooms, they need a lot of attention. Could we take them over and be responsible? And the pastor thought, well, he'll humor them and say, sure, go ahead and do whatever you can do. He said they have taken that as a high calling of ministry. They come 3 times a day all through the week to refresh and renew. They're on guard all of Sunday to make sure. He said, we have people who bring their neighbors because they wouldn't believe it until they brought them to church and showed them the bathroom. He said, the first place people go in this church is to the bathroom, and they come out shaking their heads just amazed. It's better than his preaching, all because some 5s and 2s. I'm talking basics, folks. I'm talking just getting involved with what you have. I think of the lady from the church in Green Bay, Wisconsin. They had built a new building. I'd been a part of raising the money and some of the things to get them there. They wanted me there for their first Sunday in the new building. It was even before the dedication, just moving in. Things still had to be on the punch list, but they wanted in. And it was in the days when, still you go up north, there's still some choirs that sing. And this church wanted a choir when they moved into their new building. And so they started a choir. In their old building, they were in 3 Sunday morning services in the old building, and the choir was small when they started, but they were there every service. Moved into their new building, and it was exciting to be on the platform, and the choir came in. They had new robes. They had everything. They were doing old church, but they were doing good church. And they came in and filled the choir risers. And at the end of that service, I had made some comments about the choir and some other things and complimenting the people. And the pastor felt he needed to give an explanation. And so before anybody had shifted and we'd gone on to something else at the end of my message, he came and stood by me and he said, "Jack, if you'd just give me a moment, I'd like to take care of something before we dismiss." And he left the platform and he walked out down the aisle and about 2/3 of the way. And he reached in front of some people and offered his hand. And he took a lady by the hand and brought her to the aisle. There was a hush that fell over that place. And he said some things to her quietly, and she somewhat shyly but nodded her head, okay. And he brought her to the platform. He said, "Some of you probably wondered for the last couple years," and he called her by her name, "has never," and he stopped and he said, "Have you ever missed a Sunday being in the choir since we started it?" And she shook her head, "No, been there all the time." He said, "Do you ever missed a rehearsal?" She said, "No, never missed a rehearsal either." He said, "I noticed that you know every word of all the songs that are sung by the choir." She said, "I try to, yes." The others use sheet music. She didn't. He said, "I remember when you came to me and asked if you could join the choir when we announced we were going to have one. I said, let's talk to the choir director, and I'm sure she'll be delighted." And then he stood there for a while, and he was hesitant to ask it. He said, "Can you sing?" She said, "No." He said, "Can you carry a tune?" "No." So then the pastor told the story. He said, "Till this moment, there are only 3 other people than this lady who knew that she never sang a note. I knew because she told me." He said the choir director had to sign off on it. And the lady standing next to her, for we gave her the end of the front row, but the lady next to her knew she couldn't sing. He said, "Why did you do it?" "For over 2 years, the dedication." And she said, "Because I thought presence maybe would count. That my being there would be one more body, and it might encourage somebody else to join." I've never been in a service with such a spontaneous standing ovation that rocked that place in thanksgiving, because one lady said, "Just being there, I can get my 5s and 2s down to the rehearsal, and I can get my 5s and 2s on the platform, and I can be a part of what God wants to do here." I'm talking of basics. I'm talking of things that nobody says, "I can't do anything." No, there's something you can do. I think of the lady that, widowed lady, lived alone. But she came to her pastor one day, asked if she could sit in his office and talk. She said, I get so anxious to do something of value. I'm so shy, I'm afraid to talk to people. I couldn't even be a greeter in the foyer of the church. I just don't know what I can do, but they tell me I'm really a good cook. Would the church be able to get me some groceries? I don't have any money. And I think the church has some dishes and some pots and pans. And if you could get me the supplies, I'd like to come and cook a meal, a noontime dinner for the pastoral staff. He thought he was just going to humor her, and he said, sure. He said, we have an account, and gave her the grocery store. He said, I'll let them know you're coming, and they set a date when it would be. They gave her a room to serve it in. She came and was waiting at the door, the pastor was an early bird. She knew that, and she was there. It was before dawn. She was waiting to get in. They helped her unload the car, brought in all of the groceries. She said, I'll come and tell you when it's ready. They could smell it, but little did they know how to anticipate what was waiting for them. When she said dinner is served, they went down the hallway and around and into the room that had been given her. And with amazement, they just stood there. The tablecloths that she had found had been ironed. Wasn't a wrinkle to be found. The flatware had been polished, and the plates and the glasses had been oh so well cleaned up. She'd even brought some flowers for the table. And graciously she served them. Pastor said they sat there in hushed silence, the recipient of such gracious serving. And when they had left and gone back to their offices, she said, I'd like to see you before I leave. She spent the afternoon cleaning up, and late that afternoon she came by the office, thanked him for the privilege of serving the pastors. And then she politely said, if you'd let me do it again, I'd do it again next week. And the next. And the next. Now, things like that just don't remain secret. The pastor was in the bank several weeks later, and the banker said, hey, Reverend, come here. He said, I hear there's a meal served at your church at 12 noon that is to die for. Could you get me an invitation to that table? And one by one, they reached the business community of that town at the gracious fives and twos of a little lady fixing dinner. The shakers in the movement of the business community accepted Christ one after the other and found their way into that church. All because a little lady said, I got some fives and twos. The question comes back, what do you have? I think of, I sent them my word this morning, Jack and Joni Peppel. She's now gone to be with the Lord, but when they were young marrieds, Detroit, great church they loved being in. And somebody asked if they could pick up the little neighbor boy on their street. Guess he was about 7 or 8. It was springtime, and we call it mud season up north. I don't know what you call it down here, but we have mud season there. When the frost moves out of the ground and everything is soggy and wet. And Jack had a brand new Buick. And he said that little fella came running out across the grass in the mud and crawled into the back seat of my car. And I thought, there goes my new Buick. He said, wait, my little brother's coming too. And can we go again next week? Can we go again next week? And it was a lifestyle of taking those two little boys to church. And God began to change lives and reached a family. It was interesting when Jack and Joni retired from business. They moved to Grand Rapids, where that young little fellow with dirty feet in the back of his brand new Buick was now the lead pastor of a great church that was into the thousands. And they moved there so they could be close in intercession. Joni would pray around the clock for her pastor, the little boy they took to Sunday school. Jack said, I didn't think I could do hardly anything in church except bring two little fellas. That pastor, under his ministry, sent, commissioned, and released into the hundreds of young people onto ministry. Became a college president of one of our leading Assembly of God Bible schools. Central Bible College. All because a young couple said, we got some 5s and 2s and we'll use them. I could go on and on and on, telling you about people with 5s and 2s that make a difference. I think of the couple that came to us when I served as the president at Trinity Bible College in windswept North Dakota. If you think I love Florida, you'll know why. I spent 5 years in a snowbank. 35 below zero some days, mean temperature. But this couple came to the college, their daughter, engaged to be married, going out into ministry, the two of them just finishing up and ready to go. Driving to Montana to break the news of their engagement to his parents. A drunk coming down the highway the wrong direction. Head-on collision killed both of them. On the threshold of a great ministry. Gifted kids. The mom and dad of the young lady, both engineers with Bobcat. Highly decorated. I don't know how many patents he told us once that he had under his oversight. They took the insurance money and set up a very generous scholarship fund at our college. And that wasn't enough. They loved it so much, they took early retirement, moved to Ellendale, and became volunteers. Wouldn't take a dime. You would find Vi straightening the offering envelope rack and all of that, picking up paper. Charles would be in doing dishes in the kitchen. She ran Joseph's pantry. He finally one day, because it was a giveaway to the disenfranchised, and she didn't have a mattress. They wanted a mattress, so she went out and bought a brand new mattress in Box Springs. He said, Vi, no, we give things away. We don't buy them to give them away. He said, we can't, but he said, I felt so good. I said, well, if you ever have to do it again, just tell me beforehand. But I mean, they were servants, volunteers. They gave themselves to that which was there to make sure that everything was taken care of. 5s and 2s. Whatever yours are, I don't know. But I believe each of us here, we have something we can give. Something that we can make available to God. And just as a little fella said, here's my 5s and 2s, he'll say, thank you. And if you'll step back just enough to let him do what he does so well, he'll bless it and he'll multiply it. They tell me there are better than 7 billion people in this world. Right here in the greater Orlando area, there's over 2 million people right here out of the 4 million of America. They're people that need the benefit of your 5s and 2s. If I could just kind of put an exclamation point here, let me wrap this up on what the Lord has in store. In Mark, you read concerning the feeding moment, the process that the Lord had them sit down in companies of 50 and 100. Now, you can look at that any which way you want. 50 rows with 100 in each row, 100 with 50 in each row. Groups of 50, groups of 100. I don't know how he did it, but it says that he sat them down and was organized. Now imagine with me. Now, John, you're on the front row here and you represent the pastors. Can I tell a lie? Papal decision? Okay, good. Well, I asked permission. Just imagine with me, I'm going to say, it's 50 rows of 100 in each row. That's where we're at. And the Lord has taken and blessed and broken and multiplied. And he gives it to the disciples to go serve the people. And imagine with me, the disciples come out, have some bread and fish, got bread and fish, have bread and fish, and they serve row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5, row 6. They serve it all the way back. Row 15, when they're serving 14, is reaching for it. They get back, and all of a sudden they grab the bread and fish and they bring it down front again. Row 18 heard something was going on, but didn't know what it was. Row 30 didn't even know anything was happening. But they come down to the front row, have some more bread. We've got plenty of bread and fish. And they serve row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5. They work there all the way back to where they were, and then they grab the bread and fish and they bring it all the way down front and start serving it again. You say that's ridiculous. Well, just go with me on it. Now, rows 4 or 5, maybe row 1, are saying, have you noticed the bread and fish? It's getting a little oily. You notice that? The bread's dry and the fish is oily. And they start to complain about the food that's being served. Row 19 would take greasy fish. They just want something. And then they come down and serve again, and pretty soon they're saying, have you noticed that ring on Simon Peter's finger? It's a little gaudy. Did you see the way that Philip was dressed? And they start criticizing the servers, not just the food, but even the servers. And yet the disciples are determined. They're going to start serving again, row 2, row 3, and they serve back, but never get to the others. You say that would never happen. That's a lie, and you know it's a lie. I told you I was going to tell a lie. But it's not a lie. It's not a lie. We, the church, keep serving the first rows over and over and over again. In this world, they would take what we have if we just get it to them. If we just take our 5s and 2s and go, they'd say, thank you. Thank you, we've been waiting. Around the world, the baptism today, what a delight to hear that testimony. In case you're wondering, baptism to those folks was a whole lot more critical than baptism is to us. And yet we get so focused on just taking care of us. And I just said it before you as something to consider. Now let me give you this last verse, because some of you are just about done with your part. And I didn't read this, but you need to know the purpose of this whole thing. We dealt with the practice of it, the prospects, the problems, and all of that. But let me read the 14th verse. When it was all said and done, then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, this is truly the prophet who is to come into the world. You want a testimony beyond this campus? You want a testimony that goes out, and literally here in Orlando, you touch the world, the nation very directly because of all the people who come through here. You're in an intersection of the world. And you start reaching the people who are not here. And you'll hear a testimony, then they will say, this is surely of the prophet who was promised to come. That's why the basics are so important. Would you bow your heads with me, please? Lord, as we have just taken a little bit of time to look at practice today and the basics, your patterns of providence is to use, if we will give it to you, what we already possess, what we already have. You can build your kingdom with that which is a part of this congregation this morning. Lord, you can reach those who have never been served through our going to them with the bread and the fish, the 5s and the 2s of what we have. with your heads bowed and eyes closed, I want you just to consider it for a moment right where you sit. My eyes will not serve me well through this auditorium. But if you say, I'm one of those who need, I'm the hungry crowd. I came here today to make a discovery. I want you to know you're with people who care. And if you would just quietly before the Lord say, I need you. I need you. And you'll accept Christ as your Savior, your Redeemer, your healer. He's here to do that for you right where you are. In fact, I'm going to pray a little short prayer, and if you would just go through that with me. Dear Heavenly Father, I come to you now, and I ask for your forgiveness. I ask for your restoration, for your healing of my spirit. Make me whole. I accept Jesus Christ as my Savior. Amen. Now, if you prayed that, He did it just that fast. He knows the thoughts of your hearts and your mind. Your spirit has been touched by Him today, and so you know. But I want now everybody to stand with me, and I want to conclude the service with a time of commitment right where you are. And I want you to, if you would, just take your hands and put them out in front of you. They represent the 5s and 2s. It doesn't mean that God wouldn't use your feet to take you somewhere. It doesn't mean that there isn't things of your 5 senses. But the 5s and 2s right there as you look at your hands. Are you willing to give what they represent to God afresh and anew today? And say, Lord, what could you do with this? Could you make a meal of this? Could you build a church of this? And He says, try me and see. Give me what you have, and I will multiply it. And I want to pray a blessing over you as you look at your hands, and you, for that moment, make a commitment to Him. It might be that it's resources, it might be time, it could be energy, it could just be presence to show up and say, I'm here. Lord, I pray a blessing over this congregation, over each one that is here as they hold hands extended, Lord, open before you, not a fist, but an open hand. And they say, Lord, you take what I am, take my life. Lord, let this week even bring opportunity for me to spend what I have for you, my time, my energy, my giftings, my smile, my word of kindness, my intercessory prayer of the midnight hour. Lord, take all that I am and use it. And Lord, may you bless this group now, each one of them. Bless them in their comings and their goings. Bless them as they interchange with others in the marketplace, in their home, in their schools, Lord. Bless them, I pray, in the name above every other name, the name of Jesus. Amen. And it's 12 o'clock noon. I kept my word. Bless you.
Hey everyone, I'm Pastor Jay, and I want to thank you for being part of the Calvary Online family. There are a few things that we want you to know. Number one is that we really care about you. And because we really care about you, number two is that we want to help you grow in your relationship with God. If you'd like to find out more about Calvary or connect with us, all you need to do is click on one of these options to do that. Visit our site, like our page, subscribe to our channel by clicking on the links next to me. If you have any questions, or would like some prayer, or just need someone to talk to, I want to encourage you to contact me at live@calvaryorlando.org or give us a call at 407-644-1199. Thanks again for stopping by, and God bless.